Okay, so just to open the second half of the debate. So there's something I think that maybe has been missed a little bit in this debate, is that this debate has lacked an understanding at times of that this debate is about the prioritisation of authority over the enjoyment of the pupils. And what we're saying is, whilst enjoyment is very desirable, and we think actually authority in many instances leads to that enjoyability, we think on our side there is situations, and there is that authority of the teacher is necessary in situations, and that needs to be prioritised. I.e., we think like underlying education, that's like a more important, that we think that's a necessary precondition for successful education to have that present. So there's two main things I want to focus on. First thing, I want to look at like authority as an important precondition for a successful learning environment, and I'm going to look at that because a lot of their arguments have relied on the assumption of things like mutual respect, good behaviour, of full socialisation to adult norms, and they've lacked that understanding. And secondly, the broader social context here. And I want to develop that a bit more. So, firstly, about like authority, why we think it's an important precondition. Their side, so what I've seen there, their side relies on a principle, and it's a principle that when you're prioritising enjoyment of education, there's an assumption of things like mutual respect, of things like good behaviour, of things of good behaviour, of people of being able to have that a learning environment that is possible. And we think that what they miss is how that's created. And we think a lot of that is created out of having a precondition and understanding that ultimately there is an authority relationship that exists, and that ultimately there's an awareness that exists at the end of the day. So I'm going to talk about that a bit more. So why is that basically? So we need to look at several things. Firstly, we're dealing with very large groups of young people is an assumption they miss, especially young people as well. So we're talking people in an ongoing phase of socialization, people who are still being socialized to norms of things like listening to, respecting other people as they speak, of things like being able to sit down silently while somebody else is speaking, or being able to respect somebody else's right to do something. So what they miss is that school isn't just about content and about these like work employability skills. It's also about a broader social context, and that broader social context, no, not now. It's that broader social context that they're missing, and that's really what I want to talk about. So things and we think a lot of these things are learned through authority, and they don't necessarily have to be done through direct forms of authority, but a lot of it's learned because we're dealing as well with very young kids, as I remember here. So young people who as we said, have not had a huge exposure, who are still in a very important phase. They're learning these like norms that we take for granted, and which their side is taken for granted when they talk about group work, independent learning, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes things can't be learned gradually. Oh yeah, sometimes we think authority is necessary. Because sometimes authority does simply need to be imposed in those situations, and because we think that that is a form of learning, learning to respect somebody else is being told that you need to do that, and we think that those things that authority enables that development. But secondly, and more importantly, there's a constant. The idea that there is an authority relationship there at the end of the day in the classroom also reinforces a classroom where everyone can be respected, where people can feel confident to talk. All these types of things they talk about, creating and enjoy. No thanks. All those things we think are underlined by a presence in the back of, like, it's this subconscious realization that at the end of the day there's a teacher in the room and there's an authority relationship, and that teacher, there's an understanding that coming from that authority relationship, that there is a certain dynamic in this classroom, that there's a learning environment, that there's certain norms that must be respected, and that if that doesn't happen, then there will be consequences. Things like listening to others. Also things like, we're dealing with kids, so we're dealing like subtle jibes that can be made at somebody if they make a point. Things like deliberately making somebody feel stupid, shutting down ideas, things like this. The creation of an environment creates a respect in the classroom, and that's very important for wide learning, because we think there's a very significant problem actually no thanks. A very significant problem for them is that when you have this kind of student-directed learning, or like we're not even very clear what mode that's going to take. But if you have things like students directly learning, then what we think you have is so things like voting, things like this kind of things, and guiding their learning. We feel that small people on the margins are the ones who often lose out in those situations. In those kind of, when you prioritize enjoyment, a lot of people, it's people on the margins, it's the most vulnerable students, some of the most vulnerable students who need to be protected that are lost out. And I will take you.
Yeah, so it's not our burden to prioritize enjoyment. It's your burden to actually show why we should prioritize authority, right? So at the point where you're just defending that we should have some level of authority in class, we don't have to communicate that.
Okay, I get you there. Okay, so I think what you're missing is what I'm saying is that I'm saying that authority is a necessary precondition in the learning environment. Ergo, my points about the subconscious presence of always there being an authority relationship there. Authority. So we're saying that you can have group learning, you can do all these things, but ultimately they are being enforced, that there's always an authority relationship present in the classroom. So what I'm explaining is that authority is a necessary precondition in our mind, but also things like, no thanks, I'm not going to take any more since I'm running out of time, but also things like challenges. So we think sometimes authority needs to be there just for simply, that subconscious presence of always having authority there, simply even for immediate action. Things like, we've heard bullying, but we've heard other things like unique student needs. So you might have a student for a variety of reasons. We have lots of students maybe with disabilities, for example, and lots of parents make it very clear to the school that because of their own views, they don't want that they maybe have that things like they don't want that disability made known to other students. And sometimes a teacher needs to have an authority relationship. It may seem completely unfair to other students what a teacher's doing, but a teacher's aware of different needs. They're aware of different issues. They're aware of different things that have taken place in the background of students' lives. They're the ones who meet parents, and parents explain needs. And so an authority relationship is necessary also for a teacher to impose structure, a structure because they're the ones who are conscious of that. Also, broader social context, sometimes authority is necessary, and what they listen their side of the house is things like sometimes it is necessary to put somebody in a challenging environment, to put somebody in an environment where the teacher places you beside a student because because your mind needs to be open in that way. Things like we heard about cliques, and damn it, ran out. Yeah, I'll sure leave it there. Because one, authority is an important precondition for a successful learning environment, and also really that broader social environment. And what we're really emphasising here is that enjoyment can still take place at times in the classroom, but ultimately it all stems from this precondition of authority being present, and that's why I beg you to propose.